Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and you're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned the privilege of your subscription. And of course, everybody who's watching, if you enjoy this video or get something out of it, I would implore you to click that thumbs up button. So what I'm going to be talking about today are what I consider to be 5 guitar building myths. Now, I didn't get this from an article that I read in a magazine or on the internet or anything like that. It's not the result of a poll that I conducted or anyone else conducted. This is really just sort of an informal gathering of myths based on comments that many of you have left on YouTube videos that I've produced, as well as comments that I get in emails from viewers and customers and so on and so forth. And these are myths that just seem to persist. They've been around for a long time and they just continue to reappear every so often. And I'm presenting these in order of importance, but I'm doing it in reverse order. So we're going to start out with myth number 5. You can substitute a Floyd Rose locking nut with locking tuners. This is simply not true, because a locking nut doesn't work the same way as locking tuners work. In a Floyd Rose system, what the locking nut does is it locks down the strings at the start of the scale length, and you typically lock it down once you've done your coarse tuning. And what that does is it ensures that the strings won't stretch beyond the nut, which can cause tuning stability problems, especially if you do a lot of string bending or you like to wiggle that whammy bar a lot. That's a common issue with tremolo style bridges, is that the strings can go out of tune. But with the Floyd Rose locking system, the locking nut is a key part of that system. And without it, it simply isn't going to work the way it's intended to. What a locking tuner does is it locks the end of the strings when you install the strings. It makes it easier to install the strings. Plus, you don't have to wrap the string around the post. You just simply run it through the post, lock it down, and then tune the string. And typically, the string it won't wrap multiple times around the post, and that improves tuning stability as well, but it doesn't do the same thing as the locking nut. So if you think that you can install a Floyd Rose tremolo bridge on your guitar, but then forego the locking nut and just use locking tuners, you can certainly do that, but you're not going to get the benefit of tuning stability that the Floyd Rose tremolo system was designed to achieve. Myth number 4. It's 2024 and we are still debating tone wood. I can't even believe I'm talking about this, but this keeps coming up over and over and over. The reality is, wood affects tone. Okay, I've said it. It does. It affects tone. However, in the case of a solid body electric guitar, the effect on tone is so small that it doesn't warrant consideration. There are other factors which have a much more dramatic impact on the tone of your electric guitar. The pickups, the controls that affect the signal coming out of the pickups, the speaker in your amplifier. All those can be changed and dramatically alter the sound of your guitar. And I haven't even begun to talk about the effect of some of the modern digital hardware and software technology that's available to us today. I mean, you can just add a pedal to your mix and that can dramatically affect the way the guitar sounds. So focusing on the wood that you're going to build your guitar out of is a complete waste of time. I know that a lot of guys will pick a certain species of wood because they think it's going to impart a certain tone on their guitar. You know, for example, mahogany is supposed to give you a warm sound. Maple is supposed to give you a brighter sound. But the reality is, the tone of one board to another can change dramatically. It all depends on how the tree that that board was taken from was grown, and it's not consistent. This is a product of nature. Highly skilled luthiers, when they build an acoustic guitar, they can very accurately manipulate the tone of the instrument that they're building by not only the selection of the wood, but how they thin it and then how they carve the braces. They can actually tune the frequencies of the top and the back to achieve a specific tone. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are intimidated by the thought of building acoustic guitars, because in order to fine-tune that tone by carving and shaping and sanding and doing all that, you've got to have a lot of experience. Now, if you're building guitars that are always going to have the same tone, that's a little bit easier to do, because then you're just going to always be trying to achieve the same frequencies for the top and the back for every instrument you build. But if you're trying to build for a lot of different players with different tastes and different tonal desires, it's going to be a lot more difficult because you don't have that experience of tuning the frequencies or the resonance of the top and the back. And with a solid body electric guitar, nobody ever does that. Nobody ever tries to manipulate the shape of the wood in order to achieve a specific tone. If they did that, if that was common, then every single Stratocaster, Telecaster, Les Paul, every guitar out there that's made is going to look different, because the builders would have shaved the wood or manipulated it in order to achieve a consistent tone from one instrument to the next. And they simply don't do that. I mean, think about it this way. What if you were to build a guitar, and once you were completely finished with the guitar and you played it, if you didn't like the tone, what are you going to do? Are you going to go back and reshape the wood, remove some wood, or try to add wood back in, which of course you can't do? No, of course not. You can't. You would have basically two choices. You could either change the pickups or maybe the speaker in your amplifier, or you would just scrap the guitar and have to start over and then hope that the next build that you do is going to have the tone that you want. Nobody ever shapes wood as they're building a solid body guitar to achieve a specific tone. It just doesn't ever happen. Myth number 3, finish can affect the tone of your guitar. In the case of an acoustic guitar, absolutely. If you smother an acoustic guitar in polyester, it's not going to sound as good as if it had been finished with a thin French polished shellac. However, with a solid body electric guitar, it doesn't matter. Now, with an acoustic guitar, the top and the back have to resonate. And if you encapsulate in a thick plastic finish, it's not going to resonate. Therefore, it's not going to have the richness, the fullness, or the volume that you would hope for. With a solid body electric guitar, it's the pickups that are doing all the work. So, as long as you're not encapsulating the pickups in plastic, it's not going to matter. So, I mean, you can even put a cover on a pickup, and while that will affect tone to a small degree, putting a thick plastic finish on a solid body electric guitar isn't going to have any more of an effect than if it just had a thin nitrocellulose finish. You might detect a subtle difference in tone, but you would have to ask yourself, is that because of the finish, or is it just the difference in playing the guitar one day, stripping off all the finish and putting on a thinner finish, and playing it a few weeks or months later? It may have nothing to do with the finish itself. It just may be the passage of time and playing technique and that sort of thing. So really, when it comes to selecting a finish for your solid body electric guitar, what you should be concerned with is whether you can apply the finish and whether you like the way it looks or not. Don't worry about what effect it's going to have on tone. I mean, you could take a Stratocaster and coat it in a 1/2 inch thick layer of silicone, and it's not going to sound that much different than if it had just a really thin coat of nitrocellulose. So don't worry about the finish affecting the tone on a solid body electric guitar. Okay, myth number 2. CNC guitars have no mojo. Well, I certainly hope not, because mojo is a myth. Mojo is a human construct that exists only in the mind. You can't define it and you can't measure it. Furthermore, Most of the guitars, I would venture to say 90% of the guitars that have been made in the last 40 years were made on CNC machines. And those guitars have been used to record an awful lot of great music. Now, of course, for some of you out there who are big fans of handmade guitars, if I were to hand you a guitar which I made by hand and I told you it was made by hand, you are much more likely to like that guitar, or at least appreciate it. You might even love that guitar and want to part with a significant amount of cash to own that guitar. However, if I handed you a guitar that was made on a CNC machine, and I told you it was made on a CNC machine, there's a good chance that you might turn up your nose to that guitar and not even want to bother to play it. The problem is the idea of a handmade instrument and its value is really just up in the mind. That's important, however, because you are a potential customer and I need to try to appeal to your senses in order to get you to open the wallet to buy the guitar. So if I tell you it's CNC made, there's a good chance you're not going to want to pull out the credit card or make the cash transfer to buy the guitar. However, in the end, is there any real difference between the guitar that was made by hand or the guitar that was made by CNC? On the surface, no, not really. Even down in deep, it's not really any different. The difference lies in the fact that you can make more guitars with CNC than you can when you're making them by hand. It takes a lot longer. Now, I will say there are a lot of you watching who like to build by hand because it's a great stress relief. And I can fully identify and understand that. It's especially rewarding when you finish the guitar and it turns out beautiful. All that hand working effort has paid off and you have something you can show that you're really proud of. But when you're making it with CNC, it's sort of automatic that it's going to turn out perfect. You don't have to worry about planing wood too thin or sanding off too much or misshaping a certain part of the guitar's design. It's going to happen automatically because that's how CNC works. And I think that's where a lot of folks get upset with the whole idea of CNC technology, because if it's made by hand, there might be some very subtle mistakes, craftsmanship errors that are supposed to enhance the character and therefore create mojo. And then knowing that the person who built the guitar did it by hand inspires you to create better music. But again, this is all in the mind. There's no measurable effect here, a quantifiable effect. So you should be able to create the same quality of music on a guitar that was made with a CNC machine. And as I said, for the last 40 years, the vast majority of guitars that have been made were made on CNC machines. And those guitars have been making great music. And you can hear it every time you press play on Spotify. Okay, last but not least, myth number 1. And this is going to be somewhat controversial, so bear with me on this. And I know some of you are going to agree as well. Myth number 1, sustain is overrated. Yeah, there I said it, okay? Now don't start bashing out your hate comments. Let me explain. I have learned over the years in dealing with a lot of customers that sustain isn't all that it's cracked up to be. There are a lot of guitar players out there who don't like guitars that have long, or as it's often described as, infinite sustain. The whole concept of sustain is heavily used in the guitar industry. It's used as a measure or a yardstick as to the craftsmanship, the quality of the guitar that they're trying to sell you. They'll tell you it has incredible sustain or infinite sustain or long sustain. But the reality is I keep encountering guitar players who don't want long or infinite or incredible sustain. They want the note to play and die out immediately. I can't argue with that. That's what they want, so that's what I will strive to give them. I had a customer who came in one time. Now, this is purely anecdotal. This isn't any sort of scientific evidence, but I wanted to present it as a way to explain what I'm saying about different guitar players. But I had a guy who came in with a guitar, and he said, I love this guitar, but it just rings out for too long. It sustains too long. And my notes start to sound all blended together, and I'm having a hard time getting the notes to be differentiated. And I told him, well, that's probably player technique. You need to refine and develop your technique in order to prevent that from happening. And he said, well, I've been playing for 30 years. I don't think I need to modify my technique. I just want a guitar that doesn't sustain for so long. Well, I happened to have a guitar on hand that had almost no sustain at all. So I handed it to him. I said, play this and tell me what you think. So he plugged it in, started playing it, and he said, oh my God, that's exactly what I want. Well, we ended up trading guitars, and he went away perfectly happy because there was no way I was going to take this guitar that he had and try to reduce the sustain. Because when you try to achieve long sustain or infinite sustain in a guitar, or really great sustain, there are a number of steps that you have to follow to achieve the sustain. And it's everything from how you anchor the strings at both ends of the scale, how you install the frets, how close the pickups are to the strings, that sort of thing. And trying to reverse that, it really isn't something that is possible to do. So we just traded guitars, and that was that. But I keep encountering other players, and I've had a lot of players comment. Whenever I've talked about sustain, there's always going to be at least one person who will comment that, you know, this whole concept of infinite sustain is ridiculous. It isn't necessary. So, you know, unless you're playing a note at the end of a song and want it to ring out for a long time, it doesn't make sense to have infinite sustain when you're shredding a solo on your guitar. So now granted, the idea of sustain, like I said earlier, is a measure or a yardstick for craftsmanship. And it certainly is, because like I said, those steps that you have to take to achieve maximum sustain are not easy to accomplish. And if a guitar doesn't have sustain, there's a good chance that those steps weren't followed. And if those steps weren't followed, there's a good chance that other corners have been cut in the construction of that guitar. So that's why sustain becomes a measure of a guitar's quality, which it shouldn't be. So that's kind of my thoughts on this whole idea of infinite sustain. All right, guys. Well, I hope you found these 5 myths to be an interesting subject to hear me talk about. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Post down in the comments section below what you think about these myths, or are there any other myths out there that you've encountered that you'd like to share with everyone? And remember, the comment section is always a great place for people to learn. So not only does the video help instruct, but comments left by you, the viewers, will also help others to maybe get a better understanding of what's being discussed. So, as always, until the next episode, be sure to click the subscribe button, be sure to click the thumbs up, share this video with anybody and everyone that you can think of, and I hope you'll be back for the next episode of guitar building fun here on Highline Guitars YouTube channel.